So, speaking off the cuff again about the things that are flowing through my mind, about what is the nature of the mind itself. So if you've been listening to me recently, in the last few years even, I'm saying that the mind itself is artificial intelligence. Thinking is an artificial thing. And the only laboratory that I can really study is how does my thinking occur? How do I think about thinking? Some process is going on right now. It is not happening in my brain, where I am scanning for what words to say, for how to make manifest invisible thoughts that I have not yet strung together and externalized from my internal musings. So a process happens from the inside to the outside, from my inner thoughts to my outer expression. Thinking about thinking about thinking about thinking about expressing simulations inside of simulations inside of simulations inside of simulations. And I gather that what I'm doing is I'm scanning through my memories of all the knowledge that I think I know. And I'm trying to see connections that up until now I've overlooked. Connections that are so automatic that I don't notice how quickly those connections occur. I'm going to look up the word poltergeist when I get back to the house and find out what's the root meaning of where did the word poltergeist come from. A word more often used for what I'm thinking about is the word archons, which again is a word that I mostly only hear from truthers who are repeating things that they've heard from other truthers about archons. And as far as I know from listening to those other truthers, this comes from the Gnostic writings that were dug up in the Nag Hammadi or whatever it was called caves, which are said to have come from the Essenes and Gnostics, who are talking about an archaic awareness that there are archons who are like succubus or whatever it's called. They're downloading ideas into our mind. And John Dee is one of the historical examples of people in archaic times not so long ago, 400 or 500 years ago. And John Dee is said to have been downloading a language of angels with this other guy who was channeling these angels. And this is in the realms of the occult and magic. For John Dee was said to be an alchemist and a magician in a society where there were many magicians and where alchemy was the name for science before the Enlightenment. And in more recent times it gets called science instead of being called alchemy. Older versions of that would appear to be the idea of fairies and elves, which in the modern day is spoken of as if they live in an unseen realm, but can manifest for those with the second sight, who are clairvoyant and clairaudient, who can see and hear these invisible entities, these individuals who are in a different dimension than the ones which our mind allows us to see. So in our mind we only see the 3D world of 3 dimensions of what has physical form. And in our physical form world, it's trees and plants and mountains and sky and houses and cities and TV screens and phone screens and all of that. But amongst the clairaudient, clairvisual people, they can go inside of their mind, shift their frequency dimension, and be able to perceive things which are inaudible and invisible, which means they're seen on the inside, within the third eye, within the pituitary gland or the pine cone in your mind, or whatever you want to call it. It's also called intuitive knowledge, which is also called esoteric as opposed to exoteric. It's got inner meanings which are not obvious on the outside. And that's called being able to see behind the veil or between the worlds. So again, the idea there is that there are other beings, extraterrestrials or fairies or God or angels or demons or archons or poltergeists, who are able to affect what's physical to some degree. If a physical human being opens portals, particularly, to allow them into this world. This has to do with how do we, spiritual beings, souls, incarnate, come inside of flesh. And I am poetic with how the words fall apart. So the word that I'm teaching here is the word incarnation. Carn being Latin or whatever for flesh. So to incarnate is to come inside of flesh. And my most recent noticing about language words and their connections that were invisible to me until now, and so automatic that I didn't notice it, is the word copulation, which is to do with the semen coming inside in the flesh of a female and conceiving the zygote, which becomes cells divide somehow and grow a body of a baby inside the womb, which then gets born, and from that moment has a birth chart which can be mapped through astrology, which is a language, and that language describes time. And this comes to the mind. The mind develops through the incarnation in flesh. The mind begins to receive information from the outside world and somehow automatically develop the ability to replicate and speak language and develop the individual's own mind. Therefore, the idea that my mind is separate to other people's minds and what's in my mind may be different to what's in other people's minds. And to borrow a phrase from computer science, the mind is like a program and we are separate gadgets. We are separate machines which can have separate thoughts built upon whatever our primary experiences were from birth and pre-conscious experiences in the womb, which connect with the other worlds while we're still inside and become externalized at birth and begin recording and developing a large language model, which is inherently what thinking is. Thinking is words. And so I have learned how to listen to my own thoughts, not merely say things without first thinking about it. And I have a quick mind which is able to think about things quite quickly, which is why I can speak off the cuff quite quickly with a natural flow, such as in this video. So the word copulation, I never noticed before, is also exactly similar to the word population. Through copulation, we have population. And there's only the one word at the beginning of the sentence that's different. It's similar to the word creation, is only one letter, no letters different actually, but creation and reaction. Create and react. So this is like joining the dots, but in a very factual manner, because it's merely looking at the letters, which are rock solid, concrete. We can write them down. Nobody has an argument as to whether the letter C is different to the letter P. But it did something to my mind which I find fascinating when I noticed the similarity between copulation and population. And my mother-in-law pointed out to me that the word copulation is not the same as sex, because copulation is actually to do with the semen actually igniting a xenome or whatever, zygote, and beginning an actual conception. So in my thinking, I am copulating, and that is populating my mind with entities of ideas that are mostly called theories these days. So I'm conceiving of theories, and I am interbreeding between various different theories to populate my mind with simulations within simulations within simulations, or theories within theories within theories, thereby creating structures of thoughts which we call belief systems. And what I'm being able to do here is to look at various theories in the same way as one might look at various races and see the intermixing between these races of black people, white people, coloured people, blah blah, to form more species of thoughts in an environment within my inner world. So in that sense, I can see that archons are bodies of thought, like a race of beings who live within our mind, in our psyche, which is where the mind meets the brain, or where the mind meets the spirit world, or something like that, which is where the word psychosis comes from, is the meeting place between my thoughts and the outside world. Odd years ago, I used to live in Glastonbury. I lived there for 6 years, and what I witnessed while being in Glastonbury was so many people living in Glastonbury were possessed by the ideas that they believed in, and it was a spiritual war going on all over the place in that town, where people with one set of belief systems were in a spiritual war against people who had diverse other adversarial belief systems. So, like, one version of Christianity can be at war with other versions of Christianity, Protestants against Catholics, or Christians against pagans, or Christians against Muslims, or in the likes of Glastonbury, Hindus, Hare Krishnas, all of those various many different belief systems who had judgments against other people's belief systems that my belief system is correct and yours is nonsense. Either seeing the similarities and going, yeah, isn't it great that we have diversity? Or seeing the differences and saying, isn't it terrible that we have adversity? So here, it was easy to see that people who'd taken far too many mushrooms or DMT or acid or any of these other drugs, ayahuasca, DMT, it's the horse tranquilizer one that a lot of people take, all these things. It's easy to see that when somebody is in that altered state of mind, they can open portals in their mind that allow them to connect to invisible entities, and that individual entities were actually able to hide in the recesses of those people's psychosis, which meant that an awful lot of people never actually came down out of those heightened states of super consciousness and were not able to reintegrate back into their own normal lives. Now, all that is quite specialised. Most of the ordinary people don't really interact at all with the magical people who've taken far too many of those drugs, because those people are talking gobbledygook and their language is all screwed up and you don't know what the fuck they're on about. But something that's very common for all of us, that's the same experience, is alcohol and alcoholism. So it's easy to see that somebody who has gained the title of alcoholic is somebody who is not able to resist the temptation to drink alcohol every single day. Or if they manage to give it up for a while, live in fear of taking a drink and not being able to stop again. And therefore, the alcohol is making the decisions. And with alcohol, the very strong alcoholic beverages are called spirits, and that directly links through language to the idea that people who are imbibing these spirits are bringing actual spirits in spiritual people having spirits in them and being able to disinhibit the conscious mind so that they will say and do things which normally they would be inhibited from by social norms. So what's normal is connected to the Normans, who are responsible for creating the language which we now call English and French. It's a deer that just ran by. It's my dog that just ran by chasing a deer. So there's nature doing its thing. So, there's the word possession, which is to say something that I hold on to that is mine, which equally has a hold on me. And I can worry about my possessions in case someone else interferes with them. And I can worry about my possessions in case somebody takes my possessions away, robs my house, defrauds my bank account, ruins my reputation. But the other meaning of the word possession is to have your consciousness taken by an invisible spirit who pushes your conscious incarnation out of the way and steers your life around, saying, go to that drug dealer or that liquor shop and buy more liquor and keep on buying that liquor and remain possessed by that demon. And the most common demon that people speak of is the demon drink, of alcoholism. So is it clear to say in language here that what I'm talking about here is people who are being possessed commonly, everyday practice? We all have seen people who are possessed by the demon drink, which takes over their behaviour and makes them act in ways which are not innocent. They have been polluted by a foreign entity from a different dimension who opens a portal in your life and is able to control you, remote control through your psyche, affecting your decisions. So, once upon a time, a long time ago, I did take many of these substances, including alcohol and coffee and tobacco, and became addicted. Addicted in the sense of addiction. Something was added to my diction that affected what I was saying. Is that a good way of putting this across? Of how subtle and simple this is. People can be possessed by an idea. People can be possessed by ideals. People can be possessed by belief systems and by religions and by gods and by the one God. So in the same way that everybody's got parasites in their guts, and those guts are affected and possessed to some degree by the parasites. So the parasite that's addicted to artificial foods and E-numbers, or to chocolate, or to alcohol, the parasite in your belly, such as yeast and thrush, that thrive on alcohols and sugars, it somehow communicates with your brain and your psyche to tell you and direct you to go and buy more of those substances. Which again is where the word addiction is relevant. So addiction and dictionary sort of indicates to me that we're addicted to words and we're addicted to information. Which is to say that we are trying to work something out with these demons, with these parasites, with these archons, with these spirits. Something to do with spirituality, something to do with evolution, something to do with ultimately with the end times, the idea that there's an end goal. The idea that we fell into a consummation and we are trying to work our way out of it again. The idea that we fell into incarnation from the Garden of Eden story and we are working our way out of the prison planet to get back into the heavenly state. So that the word state is another name for nation, and that the word alienation is a word for feeling separated from everyone else, and separation and alienation are quite similar, and that the nations are alien to each other because there is a perceived difference between each nation in their constitution. Constitution is the name for the set of words that are written down in documents which differentiate between how this country's constitution is made up as relative to other constitutions that have been made up in the legalese system that sounds like English but is a separate magical language. We're back to diction and the word jurisdiction. So the point here in mentioning Glastonbury is it was apparent to me in Glastonbury that at times I became possessed when, for example, I drank so much spirits that I would black out. So if you're having a blackout, that means that the demon drink has so saturated your blood chemistry that you're acting in ways that you normally wouldn't act, and you're saying things in ways that you wouldn't normally say things, and you're slurring your words in ways that I would not normally slur my words. But also with the muse, that one is able to achieve altered states of mind in which one can flow poetry far easier than one can if one is merely in one's analytical state of conscious mind, speaking in a way of lowest common denominators so that everyone else might understand what I'm saying. And the more that one follows one's own weird is the less one is speaking common parlance with common understanding, the more one is speaking in a state of psychosis, which is not the normal state of society. So what I'm speaking here is I'm saying in Glastonbury it was especially easy to be able to see that the vast majority of people living in that town are all possessed, because there were very few people in that town who did not at least drink alcohol, if not also smoke, if not also imbibe all kinds of chemical equations which change the brain chemistry to open up portals to allow one to communicate with esoteric invisible spirits, muses, thought forms and religions. And cults of personality, cults of fashion, cults of tattoos and nose rings and every other sort of an expression of some back of the mind, subconscious past life affiliations and associations and assimilations. Now, all of this is to say that ultimately the idea of the end times is a time may well come around eventually in time that is predicted. Again, the word diction, prediction. It is predicted that eventually a time will come where the demonic will be separated from the holy. I'm going to put that in a different way, where the partial fractions will separate from the whole beings who have worked out the sub-equations to become whole. The partial vanishes when wholeness comes is the primary diction that I'm aware of from the New Testament. Perhaps St. Paul, 1 Corinthians 13, definitely St. Paul. The partial vanishes when wholeness comes. I may speak in tongues of men or angels, but if I am without love, I am nothing. So the idea of the end times in that kind of Christian thing is that eventually a time will come where people download the whole of spirit rather than the divided spirits, the unwhole, the unholy. Now, I'm not much of a one for believing in ancient writings that because it's really old it must be true. I'm a one for processing language itself and being able to see something in the language which I can rationalize. To be able to discern between the wheat and chaff of complete gobbledygook, onomatopoeia, and strict logical, rational, scientific diagnosis of data. And so the link I see between John Dee downloading the language of light is it's equivalent to me to Ada Lovelace and Babbage creating the first computer software code derived from the loom of tapestry, the weaving of words in numeric languages of ones and zeros, binary code, to be able to instruct structures to break down the language into its most basic instincts in a search for being able to codify truth itself. So the idea that one can eventually compute the basis of language intelligence itself in order to be able to complete the download and become enlightened in light end. But these are all dualistic constructs. To become enlightened is, to some degree, the idea of getting away from darkness, as if darkness is bad and light is good. These are familiar themes in the stuff that I've written and have spoken before. These are things I've been thinking about for a very long time. Likely as not as a teenager, long before I ever drank any alcohol or smoked any tobacco. And to some degree, that makes me a peculiar person, because I think about things in great depths that are internally generated rather than simply believing what someone else says because they, I believe, know better. Or yes, better, to play with the language. And what I'm saying here at this point is that to some degree everyone is possessed. We all have possessions. We all seek to defend our possessions. Very few people completely give up all possessions and completely live in the moment and completely trust spirit to maintain their lives and their prosperity in nature, like the birds and bees. Again, attributed to Jesus. Be like the birds and bees. Why use your mind to try to predict the future and live in fear of loss and lack, starvation, past experience? And the difficult, perhaps even dodgy idea about the Christianity is it's saying that this physical world is not the real world, that the real world is in some place called heaven with the Heavenly Father, that your parents are not your true parents, your children are not truly your children, and entrust everything to the intelligence of the Holy Spirit to guide you, rather than trusting in your religious leaders or your governmental leaders or your militaristic leaders or your scriptures. Prescripted predictions. So scriptures are software code, and the example of that is how the scriptures of the Hebrew language, if that's what it's called, of the Jewish people, if that's what they're really called, in the Middle East, if that's a fair name for it, in Palestine, if that's a fair name for it, in Israel, if that's a fair name for it, between these nations who are at war. And if ever there was a war that was pre-scripted and will not end until Armageddon, will not end until some temple is built, will not end until the enemies are all genocided and there is only the pure people left, and the idea that some supernatural God, spirit, entity is guiding all of this, indeed created time for a special people to be the chosen ones who will be the only winners in the end, and everyone else will be subjugated to their belief system and their way of life and their code of ethics and their racial superiority relative to an idea of God, that my God is bigger than your gods are partial gods of nature, our God is the God of spirit. And that is playing out particularly for the last 3 months again, to the point where most everyone is numb to it at this stage, because there's almost nothing that anyone can do to stop that war, because it's a supernatural war being acted out in the physical plane. So again, I'm going to say that these people are possessed by religious ideas which guide them to keep repeating the traumatic traumas, the traumatic patterns, inspired to build a military might strong enough to destroy the other militaries. And this is what the Old Testament of the Bible is full of, and yet contradictorily the Old Testament has a New Testament put on top of it to be called the Bible, and the New Testament is saying that old stuff is over. Put your hands up, turn the other cheek, stop fighting, trust in spirit, And many Christians will say, trust in spirit, don't trust spirituality. Spirituality is actually demonic. And I'm just pointing out the word spirituality has the word duality in it. My overall conclusion about the resolution of all of these things is that the human mind is a binary system. Either or, good or bad, everything's dualistic, polarized. And my internal thoughts around all of this stuff is saying, well, what about the heart? The heart is actually a heart field. It's not polarized. It's not divided in the way that the brain is. It's not polyistic the way the guts are. It's not instinctual in the way that the instinctual part of the brain stem is. So the word healing, where our souls are grounded to the earth by our heels, the weak point of the Achilles heel, as it's called, the tendency in the tendons to hold stress in the body that affects our understanding of how to survive in this world. That's why I'm not looking to be a leader. I don't really advise anyone to try and follow my way of living. And I'm fairly amazed if anyone was able to follow my way of thinking even when I'm chatting this stuff. Because it's not a very clear path. It's not a very obvious, this is right and that's wrong. Essentially what I'm saying is that there's an overall field of unity in the heart which we have not yet evolved to be able to live by. So as much as the word live backwards is evil, the word love backwards is evolve. To some degree, what I understand about the word evil is an intent to destroy life completely. The reverse of life is death. Kind of idea. So in a way, war is an evil thing, murder is an evil thing. In essence, suicide could be said to be an evil thing. But here I want to talk about emotional charge, to have positive emotions or negative emotions. The positive and negative judgments upon emotions is the evil part, because it's the splitting of the whole is what's evil. To no longer be living in the heavenly natural state represented by Eden is to be subdivided, giving birth to little splinters of ourselves, incarnated. Now, I find a very beautiful analogy, again in the words, around incarnation. So to incarnate is the choice by soul to incarnate, to come inside the flesh through copulation, creating an ever-expanding population. The question there is, well, where's all these extra souls coming from? If everybody has a soul and there was once 1 million people on the planet, now there's nearly 8 billion people on the planet, was there once only 1 million souls and now there's so many orders of magnitude more souls? Is this to do with the splintering of souls continually subdividing through internal polarizations? But the analogy that I find fascinating about incarnation is that in the modern world, all the nations are incarnations, because all the nations, we're all driving cars. The interesting thing I find there, and this has links to the Christian concept that we are not the body, we are coming into the body, but we are not the body. My mind isn't in my brain. Actually, the whole physical realm is in the mind. And this version of the mind that I perceive is just a version of the mind, a sort of perception simulation. Each of us are living in our own version of perception, and each of our perceptions is a simulation of the spirit realm from which we came. So the idea there is that time and space is actually a mental construct, and souls come inside in the mental construct in a similar way to a child can go inside of the PlayStation world or the virtual world when they're playing their games and interact with other people through the screens, and there is some level of soul interaction going on and making friends with people in that virtual world, but the virtual world itself is not actually really real. It's our perception that makes it seem real. And that's easy to understand in the virtual world of playing games online or social media online, which is, again, really just a big game construct to communicate through, to externalize through, to project our language through. So I'm understanding that language is the software of the mind, in the same way as code is the software of the internet. So in the same way as I can get in my car to go somewhere and then get out of my car again while I'm in my car driving somewhere, I don't think that the car is my body. I don't think that I am the car that I'm driving. And the analogy there is, I don't think that I am the body that I'm driving. But when I'm in the body driving, I think I am the body. But I don't particularly think that. I think I have a body in the same way as I think I have a car. And so we're on a journey in time in our body, and we're traveling from one time to another time. I possess a body. I am a spirit possessing a body. But in the same way as someone else could get in my car and drive to where it wants to go to, someone could push my soul out of my body temporarily and drive my body to somewhere like the alcohol shop to buy more alcohol. The spirit of alcohol could take over the driving of my body and drive me to the shop to buy alcohol instead of driving me to my divorced wife's house to actually turn up to my appointment to see my kids, or work, or church, or whatever it is that I would choose to do if I wasn't possessed by the alcohol spirit pushing me into the passenger seat while it drives me to its stronghold, its drug den, its whatever. And equally, people can be possessed by their career and not visit their children. Do you see what I mean? Not visit their parents. So as a collective species, we are possessed and are being driven into the future, and we are projecting our hopes and fears onto that future like what's it called? Like Google Maps. We are trying to navigate our way through this terrain of time and space, through this terrain of what's called the future and the past. What I've noticed in studying thinking is that the past creates the future, and that's a duality. And the art form here is to be able to sit outside of my mind, identifying, well, if I am not my mind, I'm merely in the mind. If I'm not the body, I have a body. If when I fall asleep at night, my soul to some degree is able to escape the concentration upon the bodily things and allow all that to run on automatic while my soul dreamtime self dreams of future possibilities. Do I trust myself when I'm dreaming? Do I trust myself in my waking life? Do I recognize there is a relationship between my dream self creating my daytime self, my so-called conscious self? Do I recognize that my subconscious is actually creating every day while the mind thinks it's doing the driving, the conscious mind? And something to consider in all of this is the idea of a superconscious, as well as the unconscious, as well as the conscious, as well as the subconscious. So what's in my mind is what I have taken in, which is in my memory. And when I'm trying to figure out what things to talk about now, when I'm trying to whittle away what's the kernel of what I'm trying to think of, what's the point of what I'm trying to look at internally? It's my memories that my automated mental self is searching through in order to find what words to say next. Because without memory, I don't even know what any words mean. Words create the artificial construct of what we think is the conscious self and society and nations and a one world government and religions and ultimately how we are creating a future. And back to John Dee, back to Ada Lovelace and Babbage, back to the creation of the first computer, back to World War II, the Enigma machine, the creation of mechanical computers which are actually communicating with the superconscious realm, which is why now there's such a big fear that the artificial intelligence is actually an entity, and that entity is stealing our souls, is driving us forward, is making all our decisions for us, is controlling what we're allowed to think. And when you get to the nano bio digital convergence ideas, the idea that the artificial intelligence, the alien intelligence, AI, alien intelligence, is actually taking over the body of humanity as a whole, and the question therefore of what is free will, which again comes back to the religious ideas of what is the God who cursed Adam and Eve to fall down to a physical realm where we have babies and have to work our asses off to feed them, therefore making life not really have any free will, because we're actually in a subconscious prison planet. So the consciousness is trying to break free from the subconscious, but again, these are just dualistic ideas, and bring it back to the heart of what is love. Now, oxytocin is seen as the love chemical, but I've realized, especially lately, oxytocin as a word represents a switch, which can go from I love what I love, but if you threaten what I love, then I will hate and I will attack and I will murder you if I think you're trying to murder me, which is a question of perception in law. Yeah, that's probably quite a long video, and I'll probably leave it there for now, because it's definitely gotten quite late. Oh, and I can see up in the sky there, we are pretty much on a full moon. Didn't quite realise that. Last time I saw the moon I thought it was yesterday, and it didn't look anywhere near as full as it looks right now. Oh, if I get my head out of the way, you can see it there. Whee! Oops. It's hard to point at. There's the moon. Woohoo! The big luminary in the sky. So, yeah, to cap it off, to recap some things. The idea that there are elves and fairies back in time in the ancient past. The idea that fairies are not living in the same time constraint as our modern conscious mind limits humans to. The idea that someone like me is actually communicating with fairies. The idea I have that what fairies are ancient ancestors. Ancient ancestral memories are living in my mind, in my subconscious memory. Thus, I can communicate with fairies because I recognize that ancestors live in my subconscious mind. And I have a particular ability because of my birth chart. Because I have Sun Pluto exact in my birth chart means that my Sun is able to communicate with Pluto. Pluto represents the farthest away and the smallest, minute, densest planet in our solar system. It's the furthest away from the Sun, and it represents everything in the underworlds. It also represents everything that's in our memory that was traumatic. Therefore, those traumas keep on repeating, which again is what we talk about. The evil of this world is that bad things keep on happening. And those bad things keep afflicting us, and those bad things are killing us, and thus we keep reincarnating and reincarnating until eventually we have healed the ancient traumas of how we fell from heaven down to earth. Roughly how God, masculine, kicked the mother feminine out of heaven down to earth, and she, being magnetic, actually pulled all of our souls, eventually even the angels, and eventually even God itself will come to earth as a frequency, but it cannot really come to earth and embrace the mother and apologize until light learns to love rather than merely judge. So light is judgmental, light is intelligence, light is mental, light is what created the compartmentalism of all of these separations, of all of these soul tribes who were born in a sequence on a soul level, which are learning how to coexist in this existence, in this dualistically simulated subatomic version of spirit. Gosh, but they're big sentences. And I'll leave it there. Hey, if anyone actually understands what I'm on about, do please try to give me some feedback. Because I'm sitting here all alone, surrounded by trees, and the invisible breeze, which is blowing the branches and the leaves, beneath the luminary sun that's the luminary moon, femininely reflecting the solar sun, which has apparently passed beneath the horizon upon this spherical planet in a field of perception which we collectively perceive as a universal existence based on knowledge passed on from previous generations and modern science telecommunication abilities. Yeah, give some feedback. Thanks for listening. Fair play to you. Hello, fellow humans. And goodbye.